My wife's attorney slid the folder across the table like she was dealing cards at a casino, and my wife sat there with her arms crossed, not even looking at me. "Daniel," the attorney said, "your wife is prepared to offer a clean split. The house, divided. The joint accounts, divided. The firm stays with her since she built it before the marriage. You walk away with $400,000 and we all move on like adults." I looked at my wife. She was studying her manicure. I looked at the number on the paper. Then I picked up the pen, signed every page they put in front of me, and said, "Tell her congratulations on the new chapter." Nobody in that room noticed I was smiling on the inside. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 32 years old. I spent 6 years as a forensic accountant before my wife convinced me to leave the firm and help her build her interior design business from a boutique operation into something worth talking about. I know how money moves. I know where it hides. And I know that when someone rushes you to sign, it's because they're afraid of what you'll find if you slow down. So I signed. And then I went home to my friend Marcus's couch, where I'd been sleeping for 2 weeks, and I picked up the phone and called the one person I trusted completely. Marcus had been my college roommate, a contracts attorney who specialized in asset recovery. He had the kind of face that looked permanently unimpressed, which made him very good at his job. He handed me a beer, sat across from me, and said, "Walk me through everything again." So I did. It started 8 months before the divorce papers appeared. I'd been doing the quarterly tax prep for the business like I always did, because my wife hated numbers the way some people hate the dentist. That's when I noticed it. Not a red flag exactly. More like a question mark. A series of vendor payments to a consulting firm I didn't recognize. $22,000 here, $17,000 there. Over 14 months, the total came to just over $310,000. I asked her about it casually over dinner one night. She said it was a new staging vendor she'd started using for commercial projects. I nodded and let it go. But I kept the file, because the vendor's business address was a UPS store in Naperville, and the EIN number traced back to a company registered 8 months before our wedding. I didn't confront her. I just kept watching. And what I found over the next several months was a story I didn't want to believe but couldn't stop reading. The consulting firm was a shell. The money flowing into it was being redirected to a personal account I'd never seen before. One opened in her name only, at a bank we'd never used together. By the time I finished piecing it together, she had moved just over $480,000 out of the business we had both built and into a private account that had no trace of my name anywhere near it. That was the financial picture. The personal picture was simpler and uglier. His name was Garrett. He was a commercial real estate developer, 41 years old, divorced, and the kind of man who wore linen shirts to business dinners and thought that made him cultured. My wife had met him at a client showcase 18 months ago. I'd been introduced to him twice. He shook my hand both times like he felt sorry for me. I found out about them the way most people find out about things they weren't supposed to know. A phone left unlocked on the kitchen counter while she stepped outside to take a call. I wasn't snooping. I was just standing there. And the screen lit up with a message that started with, "Last night was everything." I set the phone back down exactly where she'd left it. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. And then I made a decision that I'm still proud of, even now. I didn't react. I didn't confront. I planned. Marcus listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he set his beer down and said, "You documented everything?" I told him, "Yes." He said, "Bank statements, wire transfers, the shell company registration?" I said yes to all of it. He looked at me for a long moment and then he said, "Daniel, she didn't just cheat on you. She committed marital financial fraud. That $480,000 is marital property. She hid it to exclude it from the divorce settlement. I already knew that. I just needed to hear someone else say it out loud." We spent the next 3 weeks building the case. Marcus pulled every document I'd saved. We had an independent CPA verify the timeline of transfers. We had the shell company traced and documented through public business filings. We had bank records showing deposits that aligned exactly with the outflows from the business account. We had everything. And then we waited. She filed for divorce on a Tuesday. Her attorney called mine on Wednesday. By Thursday they were pushing hard for a quick settlement, which told me everything I needed to know about how confident she was that I hadn't noticed anything. $400,000 and a clean exit. She wanted this wrapped up before the end of the quarter. I knew why. Garrett had a major commercial property deal closing in 6 weeks. My wife's firm had been hired as the interior design lead, a contract worth more than $200,000. It was the largest single contract her company had ever signed. And the ink wasn't fully dry yet because they were still negotiating the final scope of work. That signing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon at Garrett's downtown office. A full room. His investors, her team, the property developer's legal representatives. A celebration dinner planned after. I signed the settlement papers on a Monday. I let her attorney file them. I let her tell Garrett the coast was clear. I let her spend that week picking out restaurants for the celebration dinner and texting her bridesmaids about the vacation she was already planning. Then on Thursday evening, Marcus filed our counterclaim. The morning of the signing, her attorney called mine in a panic. My attorney, a quiet woman named Priya who had 30 years of experience and exactly zero patience for games, told them we'd be happy to discuss the counterclaim at the appropriate time and venue, which was the courthouse, and not before. I didn't go to the signing. I didn't need to. Marcus did. He walked into that conference room at 10:45 in the morning, introduced himself as my legal representative, and requested 5 minutes of the room's time before any signatures were executed. He said it calmly, professionally, the way he did everything. Garrett's attorneys looked at my wife. My wife's face had gone the color of office paper. She shook her head slightly, once, like she was trying to tell him something without opening her mouth. Marcus said a bound summary document in front of Garrett's lead attorney. He didn't raise his voice. He just said that before the room committed to any contracts, the investors might want to be aware that the principal of the design firm was currently subject to a counterclaim involving financial fraud, marital asset concealment, and potential civil liability in excess of $600,000. And that full documentation had been filed with the court the previous evening. He thanked everyone for their time, collected his briefcase, and left. I was sitting in my car 2 blocks away when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. She was not screaming. She was completely quiet, which was somehow worse. When she finally spoke, her voice was so controlled it sounded like she was reading from a script. "You should have just taken the money," she said. "You should have just been honest," I said. There was a long pause. Then, "What do you want?" That was the question I'd been waiting for. "I want what's mine," I told her. "The $480,000 you moved into the shell account. I want it returned to the marital estate before settlement. I want the business valued properly, including the contracts you signed in the last 18 months while you were systematically draining the accounts. And I want my name on the final audit before any assets are distributed." "That's not what we agreed to." "You agreed to a lie," I said. "I'm offering you the chance to fix it without a judge deciding for you." She hung up. That was fine. I'd expected that too. What happened over the following 10 days I can only describe as watching a carefully constructed house start shedding its walls in a windstorm. Garrett pulled the contract. Not canceled. Technically, just paused pending review. Which in commercial real estate is the same as canceled with extra steps. 2 of her firm's smaller clients quietly reached out about project delays. Her business partner, a woman named Stephanie who had been her college roommate and co-signed the original lease on their first studio, called my mother of all people, because she didn't have my number, asking if there was any way to resolve things privately. My mother passed along the message and didn't editorialize, which I appreciated. Marcus handled everything through proper channels. We weren't trying to destroy her business. We were trying to recover what was legally mine. That's a distinction that mattered to me, even when I was angry enough that the distinction felt thin. Her attorney reached out to Priya 10 days after the signing fell apart. The new offer was significantly different from the original one. Full return of the $480,000 to the marital estate. Business valuation conducted by a neutral third-party CPA. Settlement revised to reflect actual asset division rather than the version she'd constructed to erase my contributions. And one additional item I hadn't asked for but accepted anyway. A formal acknowledgement, in writing, that I had been a material contributor to the business during our marriage. That last part was her attorney's idea, I think. A small offering. A way of making the thing feel less like total defeat and more like negotiated resolution. I signed the revised agreement on a Wednesday morning. Priya handed me my copy. I folded it, put it in my jacket pocket, and walked out into a gray Chicago November and felt something release in my chest that had been wound tight for so long I'd forgotten it was there. That evening, I drove to my parents' house and had dinner with my father, who had worked 40 years as a structural engineer and believed that the quality of anything could be judged by how long it lasted under pressure. He didn't ask me too many questions. He just passed me the bread and said, "You holding up?" I said yes. He nodded like that was all he needed. What came next took about 4 months to fully unfold. The settlement funded. I took my share and spent 2 weeks doing absolutely nothing productive. Watching basketball, eating whatever I wanted, and sleeping the kind of heavy, dreamless sleep that only comes when something that has been pulling at you finally lets go. Then I started thinking about what I actually wanted to do next. I went back to forensic accounting. Not to the old firm, a new one I started with a partner I'd met years before, A woman named Claire who was smarter than anyone I'd ever worked with and had been trying to get me to go into business with her for 3 years. We rented a modest office in the West Loop, hired 2 junior analysts, and within 60 days had our first 3 clients. Companies that needed someone to look at their books and find what other people had missed. It turned out I was very good at finding what other people had missed. By the end of our first year, we had 19 clients and a reputation in the city's financial and legal community for being thorough, discreet, and worth every dollar we charged. Marcus referred us to 3 law firms he worked with regularly. Priya referred us to 2 more. We hired a 4th analyst. We moved to a bigger office. I'm not going to pretend the personal part healed as cleanly as the professional part. There were nights during those first months when I'd be driving home and a song would come on that we used to play in the car, and I'd have to sit in the parking garage for a while before I trusted myself to go inside and make dinner. There were moments when I thought about the version of the future I'd been planning for, the one that included her, the one where none of this happened, and I had to consciously choose to stop following that thought down to where it ended. Grief doesn't care that someone wronged you. It just shows up anyway. But I moved through it. Not around it, through it. What I didn't do was check her social media. I didn't ask mutual friends for updates. I didn't drive past the firm's studio on the way to things that didn't require me to go anywhere near it. I let that chapter be finished. What she did with Garrett or without him or with whoever came after him was entirely her life to live. The one exception was 6 months after the settlement, when Stephanie, her former business partner, reached out to me directly this time. She had my number by then, and asked if she could get coffee and talk through something. We met at a place near my office. Stephanie was someone I'd always liked, straightforward and practical and not given to drama. She looked tired. She told me that the business had restructured significantly after the Garrett contract fell through, that my ex-wife had bought her out at the end of the prior quarter, that she was starting something new on her own and wanted to ask if I'd be willing to consult on the financial architecture of the new company. I told her I'd think about it. Then I told her yes. She became one of our early clients, and her company, a smaller, more focused residential design firm, is still one of our accounts today. She never mentions my ex-wife and neither do I. There's an unspoken agreement between us that the past is a place we've both already been and don't need to revisit. I heard through a mutual acquaintance, completely without looking. The way information sometimes finds you even when you're not seeking it, that Garrett had ended things with my ex-wife around the time the Naperville Shell Company details made it into the discovery record of a different civil case she eventually faced. Something about a vendor dispute. I didn't follow the details. It wasn't my story anymore. What is my story is this. I spent 6 years building something with someone who was quietly dismantling it at the same time. And I could have missed it entirely. I could have taken that $400,000, let the settlement close, and never known what was buried underneath. But I was trained to look at numbers and ask why they don't add up. And I have never once regretted looking. There's a version of how this story gets told where I'm the man who got taken apart and fought his way back. And I understand why that's the version that makes sense from the outside. But from where I'm standing, that's not quite right. I wasn't taken apart. I was just briefly pointed in the wrong direction. The compass was always mine. A few weeks ago, I was on a call with a client, a manufacturing company in Indianapolis doing an internal audit before a merger. Their CFO asked me, almost offhand, how I'd gotten into this particular work. Forensic accounting. Finding the things that don't want to be found. I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the vendor payments that didn't make sense. I thought about a phone screen lighting up on a kitchen counter. I thought about a folder being slid across a table like a card deal, and a pen I picked up without letting them see my hand. Then I told him it was a long story, but the short version was that someone had once assumed I wasn't paying attention. He laughed and said that sounded like a lesson. I told him it was. The best one I ever got.